Welcome everyone to this episode of Andy's YouTube Food Skepticisms, and today's episode is soy and phytoestrogens. Episode 9 or 10, depending on which of my memories is correct. So we're going to go over some important vocab. I'm going to give you some introductory information on soy, some possible health benefits attributed to it, and maybe some warnings. Phytoestrogens versus human estrogens. We're going to compare those, some contraindications or reasons why you shouldn't do soy, as well as recommendations. So soy is a food or supplement derived from the soybean plant. Pretty basic, right? Estrogens are the principal female sex hormones, are also present in men. And phytoestrogens are, as the name implies, phyto, plant-derived estrogens. So they're plant-derived estrogens, mostly in soy, and they have weak estrogen agonist, antagonist functions in the body. Isoflavones is another vocab word. It basically is a type of phytoestrogen. It's widely distributed in foods, especially soy and legumes. Two types of isoflavones include genistein as well as daidzein. And genistein in particular is really influential here, and we'll mention that again, as well as daidzein. Lignans are a type of phytoestrogen. They're widely distributed in plant foods as well. And coumestans are also phytoestrogens. So just something to keep in mind if you see those words mentioned, coumestans, lignans, isoflavones, they're all types of phytoestrogens. And in particular, genistein and daidzein are types of isoflavones. Okay, so soy comes from a soybean plant, a legume. It's a high protein, complete protein source, very similar and digestible to animal protein. It's cholesterol free, unlike animal protein, and it also contains good amounts of fiber and other beneficial nutrients. It's contained in over 60% of processed foods. Many people may not realize that, but you just look at the ingredients of a lot of your common food and you'll see some sort of soy protein or some sort of soy-derived substance. Some common foods that it occurs in are soy milk, tofu, tempeh, miso, and textured vegetable protein, or TVP. And it also should be mentioned that if you buy fermented soy products, like for example miso or tempeh, they have higher active forms of isoflavones. So, fun fact. Supplements like soy isolate contain high isoflavone content. So it's something that I would caution you about. Um, but there's really no evidence to say that it's harmful. In fact, there's more evidence suggests that it might be beneficial, but I like to put that out there just in case you're wary of consuming very high concentrations of isoflavones. Too much of even a good thing. You know where that goes. Soy has been consumed in some form or another in Asia for at least 1,500 years. Between 2000 and 2007, more than 2,700 new soy-based food products were released. Between 1992 and 2008, sales of the foods containing soy increased from approximately 300 million to over $4 billion. Whoa, I should have gotten into soy industry a long time ago. Anyway, it substitutes well in meat-based recipes. It tends to take on the flavor, the surrounding flavors of the food. So I think it's quite wonderful. I try to get soy, particularly tofu, on sale whenever I see it. And phytoestrogens, it's important to mention that they're present in mixtures. Like, for example, I named a couple of phytoestrogens. Not too long ago. And what's important to note about those is that they rarely occur in any kind of isolation. There's always a mixture. So when we talk about phytoestrogens, we have to talk about all of them. But unfortunately, I don't have time to talk about some of the most important ones. So bear with me here. Okay, so some of the health benefits of soy may include lowered risk of cardiovascular disease, especially heart disease. And that probably owes to the reduced saturated fat content, cholesterol, etc. But what's even interesting is that if you remove the isoflavones from soy protein and just leave behind the soy protein itself, it still has a mild lowering effect on LDL cholesterol, your bad cholesterol. So we think this is pretty interesting, and there must be something about the soy protein itself as well, not just the isoflavones and other phytoestrogens that are in there. There is a lowered risk of osteoporosis. This is not surprising because we find that estrogens generally help osteoporosis and its development. There tends to be reduced menstrual symptoms. Just one little note of caution, if you are already having menstrual irregularities, you may want to consult with your doctor about whether you should start soy, just because it has been associated in some women with menstrual irregularities and making that worse. There has been shown to be a lowered risk of breast cancer, especially in two major studies that were done. And this makes sense because breast cancer is a very hormone dependent type. Um, and we think part of the reason that it's helpful for that is that soy inhibits the protein tyrosine kinases, or PTKs. Um, Now, what's also interesting is that those same PTKs inhibited in the brain are thought to be neuroprotective and increase cognitive benefits. The estrogen receptor binding is probably considered the biggest influential factor here on the health benefits. Just fun factoid, the two major sites of estrogen receptor binding are estrogen receptor alphas and betas. Anyway, and what happens when phytoestrogens bind to these receptors is, instead of just having a pure estrogen effect, they actually become more like estrogen modulators and sort of selective in how they exhibit effects. So we also know that soy tends to bind immediate genes in the area, including JUN and FOS, but there's emerging research in this area, so stay tuned to figure out what that's doing. And it's also important to note that tamoxifen, which is a breast cancer drug, works similarly to soy in that it does bind a lot of these receptors and decrease the progression of breast cancer. In 1999, the FDA approved a label, even a health claim. It says it may reduce the risk of heart disease. So that's a pretty big deal. It takes a lot to reach that threshold. Uh, so we could be pretty sure that soy is generally safe and beneficial. Anyway, daidzein, which we mentioned before, it's a type of isoflavone, converts to equal with the presence of proper gut microbiota. And and pardon the pun here, the conversion is not equal between non-vegetarians and vegetarians, with vegetarians and people of Asian descent generally being more capable of making this conversion to equal. And we believe that is crucial to what's going on there with the health benefits, is that conversion to equal. Absorption differences may play the biggest role in your serum or blood levels of these phytoestrogens, just so you know. So, some caution with health benefits. Some phytoestrogens function as hormone function disruptors, or HDs. More research is needed, but for example, a small SUNY downstate study showed adverse effects from this. It's speculated by some scientists to possibly function like synthetic HDs, like BPA you might have heard of in your plastics. But this needs more evidence, and most clinicians regard soy as totally safe, especially versus synthetic forms of these phytoestrogens. We probably want to avoid with infants and pregnant women out of an abundance of caution. There's some speculation that because phytoestrogens as well as estrogens play a role in sex differentiation in the brains of young developing babies, that you probably don't want to introduce soy as an extra factor without really knowing much more about the effects of it long term. But we kind of have mixed results from that, so just FYI. We do know from cheetah and mouse studies that they had some increased reproductive issues, including more miscarriages and infertility, and actually decreased sexual interest in females. Um, but again, these are animal studies, and they don't translate very well to humans. I mean, there are a lot of common metabolic pathways and everything, but I do highlight the animal study factor because much of the scare that revolved around saccharin in the early days, and one of the reasons it was banned by Canada for some time was because of early rat studies that showed that saccharin produced bladder tumors in rats. But later on, of course, when we study humans, there are important metabolic differences, and those problems were not found in humans. And it's the reason you can buy saccharin in Canada today, because scientists had to reverse themselves. Um, but irregular menstrual cycles may recur, as I mentioned before, so just something to be cautious about. Um, Estrogens more generally are thought to promote tumorigenesis in breast tissue. Um, Researchers point to Asian studies and the rates, the relatively low rates of cancer issues, of breast cancer issues in Asian populations as being evidence that this is safe. And so do Chinese breast cancer studies. But the theory is there that it promotes tumorigenesis, and it may be something to discuss with your doctor if you have a history of diagnosis with breast cancer. And a fun factoid for men, Syrian hamster study showed an increased aggression in testosterone measurements in male mice who took soy. So this simple idea that soy, because it has phytoestrogens, increases estrogen in males, we really don't have any basis for that information. All right, so I promised I would compare phytoestrogens with human estrogens. Well, you can see why they would bind similarly just by looking at them here. A lot of common ring structures, a lot of alcohol groups. Uh, just so you know here, the OH group at the end here, the functional OH group, is considered the alcohol functional group. And one way you can always tell whether a chemical is an alcohol is will often end in the suffix ol as an alcohol. Um, anyway, but comparing here, you can see how similar they are. It's pretty amazing. Nature is. All right, so some contraindications. We talked about women with a history of breast cancer might want to be cautious, but again, that's mixed. So that's why I say possibly a contraindication. You want to speak with your medical doctor about that before you make a decision. Uh, One contraindication that seems to stick is that women who are pregnant or breastfeeding and with newborns might want to show more caution. Okay, so my recommendations. Consuming soy may be beneficial for many, especially Asians and vegetarians. And the reason for that, again, goes back to conversion to equal. Anyway, don't consume if you're pregnant, breastfeeding, or a developing infant. The guidelines are a little iffy on that one. It could go either way, so I would just say that speak with your doctor about it and talk about an individual approach. Bodybuilders may actually benefit from the theoretical estrogen modulation by phytoestrogens from soy and a possible increase in testosterone, as we saw with some of those hamster studies, Syrian hamster studies. Now, randomized control trials, which you remember from a previous video of mine, is one of the highest forms of evidence that you can have, show that up to 6 servings a day are not shown to be harmful for male reproduction. And that includes things like sperm count and viability. The American Cancer Society, for its part, has chimed in on as far as breast cancer and soy consumption. And they say, listen, 2 large studies, there's actually been a benefit shown, but if you want to be on the cautious side, you may consume up to 3 servings a day if you've been diagnosed with breast cancer. Be aware of concentrated sources. I say this as a general rule with most types of nutrients. these mega dosages of soy isoflavones and things like that. We just really need further research. So before we go mega dosing on things like that, I tell people to be wary. But more likely, it's soy protein is actually probably beneficial for you. So, and the odds of developing a soy allergy are about 1 in 2,500. So, please avoid if you are allergic. Again, if you like this content, please like and subscribe. Please like and subscribe. I think, I don't know how many subscribers I have now, but it's a rather paltry number. We can do better, guys. Spread the word. And here are a few references.